Welcome, friend, to History Lullaby. Tonight, we find ourselves in the shadowy, mud-caked world of Dark Age Britain, a place where central heating meant sleeping next to a goat, literacy was suspicious, and a successful day was measured simply by surviving dysentery. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe if you enjoy wandering into the past with us, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It's fascinating to see the map of our listeners unfold across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a soft fan for background hum, and settle in. Imagine waking with a sneeze, the cold air pressing through the cracks in a timbered hut, and a goat staring directly into your soul. It's not your goat. You don't own one. You haven't fed it. And yet it waits patiently, indifferent to your confusion. Step carefully into this world of mud, frost, and survival, where every moment is a negotiation with both the elements and the small, persistent creatures that share your life. You wake up with something crawling across your cheek. Not a lover's gentle touch, not a pet dog licking your face in affection. No, this is a flea, or a louse, or perhaps some small creature that has been happily sharing your straw bed since before you collapsed into it last night. You flick it away, though not very far. It will be back, or its cousins will, because in the Dark Ages, the line between my bed and wildlife habitat is blurry at best. Your bed is not really a bed, more a mound of straw thrown together in one corner of the hut. The straw long past its prime, damp at the edges, and rich with the ecosystem of tiny, biting companions that ensure you are never truly alone. If you are lucky, there's a bit of fabric or a blanket, but fabric is expensive, and luck is rare. The blanket is usually damp anyway, because in Britain, dryness is something you've heard about in stories, not something you've actually experienced. Above you, the roof groans. It leaks steadily, dripping onto your face with a rhythm almost musical in its persistence. Each drop falls with the solemn inevitability of time itself. Plink on your forehead, plink on your nose, plink into the straw. If it is raining, and it is always raining, the sound is relentless. Buckets catch what they can, but the buckets themselves leak, and so the hut smells permanently of damp wood, wet straw, and smoke. The smoke is perhaps the most defining feature of your morning. The fire has smoldered through the night, because letting it die would mean stumbling into the freezing air to find kindling and coax life into embers with half-frozen fingers. There is no chimney, only a hole in the roof that may or may not let the smoke escape. More often it doesn't, and the hut fills with haze until your eyes sting and your throat tightens. You cough yourself awake, lungs coated in the soot of your own survival. Congratulations, you've invented the medieval alarm clock. Smoke and phlegm. Privacy is an exotic concept. You share the hut with your family, possibly extended family, possibly livestock. Everyone sleeps together, huddled for warmth, because the alternative is death by cold. Your siblings roll over beside you, muttering in dreams. Your parents snore at the other end of the room. The goat watches you from suspiciously close quarters. The goat does not blink. It never blinks. Sometimes it wanders over and chews on your blanket, or what passes for one. Sometimes you wake to find it staring into your soul. This is normal. Central heating in Dark Age Britain is a goat sharing body heat, whether you want it to or not. The floor is dirt, uneven and damp, worn into hollows where puddles collect. When you swing your feet out of the straw, they sink into mud, not onto boards. Your toes curl against cold earth that never seems to dry. If you are lucky, there are rushes or reeds spread out, replaced when they rot, which is frequently because everything rots in this damp little island. The smell is an ever-changing mixture of mildew, manure, and smoke, seasoned with the faint tang of sweat and cabbage. You learn not to notice it, because noticing it means you cannot eat, and eating is survival. The first sounds you hear each morning are not roosters crowing, though sometimes a rooster will add its opinion. More often, the sound that wakes you is coughing, wet, rattling, constant. A villager clearing his lungs of smoke and disease. A child wheezing in the corner. Your own chest heaving as if air itself has to be negotiated each day. You do not wake to birdsong, but to bronchitis. The dawn chorus is phlegm. Washing is not part of your morning routine. There is no soap. Soap exists, technically, but in form so harsh it feels more like punishment than cleanliness. And besides, water is not plentiful enough to waste on something so decadent as daily washing. You might splash your face from a bucket if the water is not frozen solid, but bathing is rare, reserved for the desperate or the dangerously dirty. Smell is not shameful here, it is universal. Everyone carries the perfume of smoke, sweat, and soil. If you are lucky, you occasionally add wet dog or barnyard to your bouquet. You dress in the same tunic you slept in, because clothing is not abundant. Changing into something fresh each day is a fantasy belonging to people centuries in the future. Clothes are patched, repatched, and passed down until they are more stitched than fabric. Your tunic is itchy, the wool rough, but you stop noticing after the first few hours of wearing it. If you own shoes at all, they are crude leather, stiff in winter, damp in summer, and forever carrying the scent of the animals they once were. The hut itself is alive with noise. Children whine, livestock grunt. Someone stirs the fire back to reluctant life. The goat sneezes. Your father clears his throat and spits into the ashes. Someone trips over someone else in the dark. It is a communal chaos that never changes. You learn to ignore the background symphony of discomfort because focusing on it would mean madness. The roof beams drip onto your head as you try to rouse yourself fully. You drag a hand across your face, leaving a smear of ash from the fire and dirt from your straw bed. You inhale the smoke-heavy air, cough again, and stand, stretching your back until it cracks. Outside, the day is gray, as it always is. The cold seeps through the door before you open it, announcing itself like an unwelcome guest. You step outside into mud, always mud. It clings to your feet, your clothes, your soul. The village sprawls in shades of brown and gray. Huts sagging into the earth, thatched roofs bowed by years of rain, paths so deeply rutted by feet and carts that they look like trenches. Smoke rises in lazy streams from holes in rooftops, merging with the low mist that never seems to lift. Somewhere a dog barks, somewhere else a baby wails. You look around and realize that this is the entire world. Mud, smoke, goats, and people trying not to die before the sun sets again. And yet, as bleak as it is, you accept it. There is no alternative. There are no castles waiting to whisk you into comfort. No bustling cities filled with delights. No distant dream of paradise. This hut, this straw bed, this goat that occasionally chews on your sleeve, this is life. It is uncomfortable, unclean, and unkind, but it is also shared. You are not alone in your misery. Everyone around you wakes in the same smoke, coughs in the same darkness, trudges into the same mud. Somehow, the collective suffering makes it bearable. You learn to take small victories where you can. A night where the roof does not drip directly onto your forehead feels like fortune smiling. A morning when the goat chooses not to chew your blanket feels like luxury. A day when the coughing is slightly less apocalyptic feels like a festival. The bar for joy is low, but it is steady. You do not dream of glory, you dream of dryness. And so, each morning begins the same way, with fleas in your straw, smoke in your lungs, mud on your feet, and a goat at your side. You rise from discomfort into more discomfort, and you endure, because enduring is all there is. Life in Dark Age Britain is not about triumph, it is about repetition. You wake, you cough, you itch, you carry on. And if you survive long enough to crawl back into your straw at night, still breathing, still coughing, still alive, that is victory. You wake from the smoke and the coughing and the goat staring at you. And now comes the next great challenge of the day, breakfast. The word suggests comfort, warmth, maybe even joy. In Dark Age Britain, however, breakfast is less about pleasure and more about not collapsing in the mud before noon. It is fuel in the barest sense of the word, a daily reminder that food is not about enjoyment, but survival. Your meal is porridge, always porridge. Not the creamy kind swirled with honey, not the kind dotted with raisins or spiced with cinnamon. No, this is gruel, and it looks like punishment ladled into a bowl. A gray, thin sludge, somewhere between soup and sadness. boiled from oats or barley if you are lucky, weeds or ground acorns if you are not. It never tastes the same, but it always tastes terrible. Sometimes it is bitter, sometimes sour, sometimes bland enough to remind you that flavor is a distant invention of future centuries. Occasionally, if the pot was left too long, moss sneaks in. It clings to the sides, boiled down until it becomes part of the slurry, giving the whole mess a faintly green tint. You do not complain, because moss at least changes the color. You shovel it in, spoon by wooden spoon, telling yourself it will give you strength. It doesn't, not really, but it is better than nothing. The texture is its own ordeal. The grains are rarely ground fine enough to be smooth. More often, it feels like chewing on gravel suspended in lukewarm water. You chew, you swallow, you repeat. Each mouthful a reminder that you live in a time before sugar, before butter, before anything resembling joy could be added to food. If you are lucky, someone found a root to throw in the pot for extra substance. If you are unlucky, the root is stringy, tough, and tastes faintly of dirt because it came directly from the ground with minimal rinsing. Protein exists, but not in the way you wish it did. Occasionally, a fly will fall into the porridge and remain there, a little bonus speck of crunch and nutrition. You do not flick it away. You eat it because meat is rare, and beggars cannot be choosers. Sometimes children chew on roots dug from the earth, passing them around with the solemnity of treasure, each bite leaving behind teeth marks for the next. Cousins fight over half-gnawed tubers, their faces streaked with dirt, their laughter edged with desperation. This is breakfast. Alongside the porridge, you might drink something generously called tea, not the fragrant leaves imported centuries later, not the aromatic brews poured from porcelain. Your tea is made from whatever herbs could be found nearby. Nettles, twigs, dried leaves, a flower that may or may not be edible but looks vaguely promising. Boiled in water, it becomes a murky liquid that tastes like someone strained a puddle through a handful of hay. It is bitter, sharp, sometimes grassy, sometimes woody. You drink it anyway, because water on its own can be dangerous, filled with whatever ran into the stream last night. And at least boiling the twigs makes it slightly safer. There is no coffee. The idea of coffee has not yet arrived on these shores. There is no sugar, no milk, no sweetener to mask the bitterness. What you drink in the morning is not comfortable in a cup. It is a liquid obligation. It keeps you hydrated enough to shovel dung later, and that is the best you can hope for. Luxury is a word that does not apply to your diet. A berry, if found, is treasure. A scrap of meat, rare enough to appear only on feast days, is cause for celebration. Most mornings, you eat what is given, you drink what is poured, and you do not complain, because complaining changes nothing. Hunger is the real master here, and hunger does not care about taste. You watch your family eat in silence. Everyone's face is the same blank, resigned, chewing with the grim determination of people who know this is all they will get until evening. A child slurps too loudly and earns a swat. Someone coughs into their bowl and no one blinks. The goat noses around for scraps and someone shoos it away half-heartedly. The porridge is too thin to share, but the goat doesn't know that. You eat quickly, because if you do not, someone else will. Bowls are scraped clean, spoons licked, fingers dipped to catch the last grains clinging to the wood. Hunger makes etiquette irrelevant. When the pot is empty, there is no more. Tomorrow will bring another pot, another round of gray sludge, another morning of chewing through gravel to stay alive. Sometimes you imagine what food might taste like elsewhere. Stories drift in of nobles feasting on roasted meat, of monks with gardens full of herbs, of foreign lands where spices exist. You imagine flavor, richness, the delight of eating something that brings joy instead of just calories. But you know these are dreams for other people. For you, for your family, for your village, breakfast will always be porridge, tea that tastes like twigs, and the faint hope that tonight might bring something slightly different. And yet, even in this bleakness, you survive. The porridge fills your belly enough to keep you standing. The twig water hydrates you enough to endure the labor waiting outside. You learn to stop expecting pleasure from food, and instead measure meals by whether you are still able to walk afterward. In this world, eating is not a celebration. Eating is endurance. So you scrape the last of the gray slurry from your bowl, swallow the last bitter mouthful of twig tea, wipe your mouth on your sleeve, and stand. Your stomach is not satisfied, not in the way you wish it could be, but it is not empty either. And in Dark Age Britain, that is enough. Breakfast is over. The day begins. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is swallowed down in silence, and then the real business of the day begins. You might think life in the Dark Ages was about heroism, battles, or noble quests. It wasn't. It was about dung. Dung in the morning, dung in the afternoon, dung so consistent in your daily routine that if you were to somehow time travel into the future and someone asked you to describe your childhood, you could sum it up in one word: manure. The shovel you use to deal with this reality is not sleek, not sharp, not even reliable. It is a warped piece of wood, splintered from years of rough use, tied together at the weak points with strips of leather or rope. The blade is uneven, so sometimes it scrapes the ground, sometimes it digs too deep, sometimes it simply refuses to cooperate, and you end up using your hands instead. And yet, it is your most faithful tool. You spend more hours with this shovel than you do with your family. You move dung because dung is wealth. It is the currency of survival, more valuable than coins you will never see. The cows and goats and pigs you keep are not just food sources. They are walking factories producing the material that fertilizes your fields, heats your huts, and occasionally, if you are particularly desperate, acts as payment to a neighbor. Manure is fertilizer first and foremost. Without it, your fields would starve, and you along with them. The cycle is endless. Animals feed you. You feed the soil with their leaves. The soil feeds the crops. The crops feed you and the animals. And then the animals feed the soil again. Round and round, forever. A closed loop of necessity that ensures you will never be free of the smell. Sometimes dung is dried, patted into shapes, and stored as fuel. On a cold day, there is nothing more comforting than the crackle of a dung fire filling your hut with warmth and smoke. Yes, smoke that makes your eyes water and your lungs burn. But still, heat is heat. You learn not to complain. To someone centuries later, the idea of sitting beside a pile of burning manure might seem horrific. To you, it is cozy. The stink is just part of life, so constant that it fades into the background. You only notice it when you imagine, in the faintest whisper of longing, what it might be like to live without it. At times, dung is even exchanged. A neighbor with poorer animals might ask to borrow some of your wealth to fertilize his plot. You trade in piles, measured not by weight, but by wheelbarrow loads, or in your case, by sled loads, because wheels are useless in mud. You drag sledges through the muck, loaded with dung, the ropes biting into your shoulders as you stumble forward. This is currency that sticks to your boots, smears across your tunic, cakes under your fingernails, and dries into every crease of your skin. Money smells worse than people like to admit. The animals, of course, watch you as you labor. The goat cocks its head, unimpressed. The cows blink slowly, chewing with the calm judgment of creatures who know you will spend half your life collecting what they drop. The pigs snort and root, oblivious, sometimes toppling your carefully piled work just to remind you who really runs the farmyard. It is hard to feel proud under the gaze of animals who seem faintly amused by your efforts. The mud, always present, ensures that dignity is never part of your day. Carts, with their wooden wheels, sink hopelessly into ruts, so sledges are the only reliable transport. You drag and drag, boots squelching, knees splattered, back aching. By mid-morning, you are so covered in filth that if you tripped and fell face first into the muck, no one would notice. You already look like the ground. Work begins with the first light and stretches endlessly. There is no clock, no neat schedule to break the day into manageable pieces. Time is measured in tasks. Once the animals are mucked out, there are fields to tend, fences to repair, wood to chop, water to carry, and always more dung to shift, because the animals do not stop producing, not for weather, not for mood, not for your exhaustion. You shovel because to stop shoveling is to risk hunger, and hunger is the one master harsher than the Okasan ever was in any geisha house. You sometimes catch yourself wondering if this is really all there is: mud, dung, smoke, and labor, so constant it erases thought. The answer, unhelpfully, is yes. This is what life is. Not glory, not poetry, not the grand histories written by monks in their dry halls, but backbreaking labor carried out by people who will never be remembered. The monks may write of kings and battles, but they never write of you, hunched over a warped shovel, scooping piles in the gray drizzle. And yet, it is your work, not theirs, that keeps the world from collapsing. Children are put to work as soon as they can stand. They chase animals, fetch water, collect firewood, carry smaller piles of dung in baskets strapped to their backs. There is no childhood in the modern sense, no years of play and schooling before responsibility arrives. You are born into labor, and it follows you until you die, which is often not very long. The rhythm of life is not measured by dreams but by chores. There are no weekends, no holidays except for the rare feast days dictated by the church, and even then, work waits just outside the door. Livestock do not respect saints' days. Crops do not pause for prayer. Mud does not dry up, because you would like a rest. Every morning, without fail, the same routine begins, and every evening you collapse back into your straw, knowing tomorrow will be the same. Dignity does not survive this. You learn quickly to abandon any notion of grace or pride. You are filthy, perpetually, and so is everyone around you. Clothes are stained, hands are cracked, faces streaked with ash and dirt. To be clean is suspicious. To be neat is impossible. You stop apologizing for the smell you carry, the grime under your nails, the streaks across your face. No one else is any different. And yet, in the strangest way, this endless labor binds your community together. Everyone is equally miserable, equally exhausted, equally trapped in the cycle. You nod at your neighbors as they drag their sledges past, shoulders bent, and there is a grim solidarity in the shared suffering. You do not talk much as you work words, waste breath, but you do not need to. Everyone knows what it means to spend hours ankle-deep in muck, to feel the rope burn across your shoulders, to bend until your back protests and then keep bending anyway. Occasionally, when the sun breaks through the clouds, you pause and look around, seeing your village with different eyes. Smoke curling from roofs, children running barefoot in the mud, men and women dragging sledges across the yard, animals lowing and bleeding, the constant squelch of feet in the muck. It is ugly, harsh, and yet alive. This is your world. It may stink, but it survives. By the time dusk approaches, you are bent, weary, and sore. Your arms feel like lead. Your back ached hours ago, and your skin is layered in grime so thick it is impossible to tell where dirt ends and you begin. You are too tired to think about the indignity of it all. You simply accept it. Because this is the rhythm of your life. Work begins early, dignity ends early, and survival sits somewhere in between. And when you finally slump back into your hut, the goat watching with judgment as always, you know tomorrow will be the same. Dung, mud, smoke, labor, day after day, until your back gives out or your body stops moving. In Dark Age Britain, life is not measured in victories or glories. It is measured in shovelfuls of muck carried from one place to another. And if you manage to carry enough, long enough, you live. And in this world, that is all that matters. In Dark Age Britain, time is not something you measure by clocks or calendars. There are no neat squares on a wall telling you what day it is. No watches ticking on your wrist. No reminders to update the month. Time here is slippery, muddy, and entirely uncooperative. When someone asks when something happened, you do not answer with dates. You say, 3 mudslides ago, or around the year the goose went missing, or back when old Wolfgar fell in the well. Seasons are more reliable than numbers. Lambing season, harvest season, the season where everything freezes and you wonder if your toes will survive. You live in cycles, not in chronology. Days are marked by the rising and setting of the sun, which you barely see anyway through the constant drizzle. Years are marked by famine or flood or plague. Memory itself becomes a calendar of disasters. There is no history, only a fog of stories stitched together around what went wrong, and occasionally, what went right. Into this fog steps faith, though faith is far too simple a word. What you have is less a clear religion and more a patchwork of beliefs stitched from scraps of Christianity, pagan spirits, superstition, and whatever your grandmother muttered when she thought no one was listening. The missionaries came with their crosses and their Latin prayers, and the monks settled with their books and their chants, but the land itself was older, and it whispered of gods in the trees and voices in the rivers. You do not see these as contradictions. You see them as insurance. A saint may protect your soul, but what about your sheep? Better leave an offering under the oak tree, just in case the spirit who lives there gets moody. A crucifix might guard your house, but when your child coughs through the night, you still place a carved charm under their blanket, because who knows which power will listen first. Faith here is not loyalty. Faith is hedging your bets, spreading prayers like seeds and hoping at least one takes root. The priests preach of one God, of Christ who died for sins, of salvation beyond the mud and misery. You bow your head, you listen, you nod. But the moment you leave the chapel or the corner of a hut that pretends to be one, you glance at the sky to see if the ravens are flying oddly, because ravens are omens, and you would be a fool to ignore them. The priests say that old beliefs are nonsense, but when the river swells dangerously, you still whisper to the water spirit, asking it to spare your village. The monks might frown, but the mud listens better than Latin. The monks themselves are curious. They live apart, in stone houses or wooden cloisters, scratching strange marks into parchment, while the rest of the world scratches lice from their hair. They know how to read, how to write, how to track time with moon cycles and star charts. They are scholars in a land where most cannot even scrawl their own names. To you, their knowledge looks like magic. Astronomy, medicine, scripture, it all blurs together, and you do not separate wisdom from sorcery. A monk muttering Latin over an herb looks very much like a druid muttering charms, and you are grateful for either if your fever breaks. Healers drift through villages carrying sacks of herbs and bottles of dubious liquid. They pray and chant, but they also smear mud on wounds, burn leaves to clear the air, and tie talismans around your wrist. Is it medicine? Is it magic? You do not ask. You swallow the potion, grimace at the taste, and hope you wake up the next morning. Faith here is practical. It is not a matter of doctrine, but of desperation. You do not care whether the power that saves you comes from Christ, from the oak spirit, or from a half-drunk healer who insists frog bones will cure your cough. You care only that it works. And when it does not, because often it does not, you shrug and try again. Another prayer, another offering, another ritual. Superstition weaves into every corner of life. Crows circling above mean death. A strange birthmark might be a curse. A sudden noise in the forest could be a fairy or a demon. And either way you run. You touch wood, not for comfort, but because you believe it is alive, listening, and you do not want to offend it. You toss salt, if you can afford salt, to ward off spirits. You hang iron at the doorway because someone said it keeps witches away, and you are not taking chances. This patchwork of belief is not contradiction. It is strategy. The world is harsh, unpredictable, cruel. You cannot afford to trust only one system, so you collect them all. Crosses, charms, herbs, omens. You pray in church and whisper to trees. You listen to the priest and also to the old woman who insists a hair running across the path means disaster. You do not laugh at either. You nod. You obey. You carry the weight of both, because the cost of ignoring either might be your life. And yet, in this mixture of fear and hope, there is comfort. Ritual makes sense when nothing else does. Lighting a candle in the chapel feels the same as tying a ribbon to a tree branch. Both make you feel less helpless. The world may drown you in mud, disease, and raids, but at least you have words to whisper, gestures to repeat, stories to cling to. Faith, no matter what form it takes, is survival disguised as devotion. You do not speak of theology. You do not debate doctrine. You do not ask whether Christ's resurrection and the oak spirit's whispers can coexist. You do not need them to. You live in a world where crops fail, where children die young, where strangers with axes may appear on the horizon at any moment. You will take any help you can get, from any source willing to give it, And so your life is guided by a patchwork portfolio of protections. Saints on the walls, charms under the bed, herbs hanging from the rafters, omens read in the flight of birds. You survive not by choosing one truth, but by believing in all of them at once. Because the Dark Ages are not generous enough to reward purity of faith. They reward only those who hedge their bets. When the priest asks if you believe in God, you say yes. When the healer tells you to bury a toad under your doorway, you say yes. When your neighbor warns you that the moon looks strange and disaster is coming, you nod and say yes again. Belief here is not about conviction. It is about survival. And perhaps, in the end, that is the truest form of faith. Not certainty, but endurance. Not the comfort of knowing, but the persistence of hoping. You pray, you chant, you whisper, you hedge your bets, and you live another day. In Dark Age Britain, that is miracle enough. Life in Dark Age Britain is never peaceful. Not really. Even on the rare mornings when the sun breaks through the fog and you find yourself thinking, perhaps today will be kind, something always lurks at the edge of awareness. The truth is simple. Danger is constant. And safety is an illusion you cling to in order to get through the day. You live with threats like you live with fleas, always present, always biting, but so common you stop noticing until one of them kills you. The most terrifying threat is the one you cannot predict: Vikings. They arrive not like armies, announced and organized, but like nightmares. Rumors travel first, drifting from one village to the next. Longships spotted on the coast, strangers with axes landing at dawn, whole settlements burned before breakfast. You never know when or where they will come, and that uncertainty gnaws at you more than hunger ever could. You live inland, perhaps, and tell yourself you are safe, but the stories insist otherwise. They followed the river, someone whispers. They came at night. They struck while everyone was at church. Every tale is worse than the last, and each one ends the same. Smoke, fire, screams, and nothing left but ash. Your village debates endlessly what to do if raiders appear. Some argue for prayer, surely God, or the saints, or even the old tree spirits will protect you if your devotion is strong enough. Others argue for hiding in the woods, scattering like startled rabbits until the danger passes. Both strategies feel weak, but they are all you have. You cannot fight. You own no swords, only farm tools. And while a pitchfork is fine for hay, it is not much use against a man with a shield and a taste for conquest. And so you live with the dread as though it were weather, unpredictable, inevitable, and beyond your control. Each time the wind shifts strangely, you glance toward the horizon. Each time you hear distant shouting, your heart races. Each night, you wonder whether the morning will bring ordinary chores or flames. Fear becomes part of your bloodstream. But Vikings are only one danger. Illness is your constant companion. It lurks in the smoke-filled air of your hut, in the mud caked on your feet, in the water you drink from streams that double as latrines. A cough can kill. A fever can burn through your body in days. Wounds fester, turning from scratches into death sentences with alarming speed. There are no hospitals, no antiseptic, no neat rows of pills to swallow. There are only healers, and healers are more art than science. When you fall ill, someone calls for the village healer, who arrives with a pouch of herbs, a jar of something that smells worse than dung, and an unshakable confidence. They smear sacred mud on your skin, mutter incantations under their breath, and tie talismans around your wrist to ward off evil spirits. They hand you a drink brewed from boiled weeds, bitter enough to strip the taste buds from your tongue. If you are lucky, the fever breaks. If you are unlucky, you die. Either way, the healer claims success, because clearly the gods or saints wanted it that way. Leeches are popular too. They are pressed against your skin, left to swell as they drink your blood, because someone once decided that sickness was caused by too much blood in the body. You watch the leech grow fat, writhing with your stolen vitality, and pray it knows what it is doing. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes you just end up with fewer blood cells and a new rash. Superstition layers over medicine like moss over stone. A charm carved from bone, a prayer whispered at dawn, a scrap of cloth tied to a tree, all are thought to keep illness at bay. No one questions it, Because questioning does not cure fevers. You cling to whatever scraps of hope you can, piling saints and spirits and talismans together like shields made of straw, hoping one will hold. And even when illness does not kill you outright, it gnaws at your life. Coughs rattle permanently in your chest. Wounds never heal cleanly. Skin diseases spread unchecked. You itch, you limp, you wheeze, you endure. Pain becomes as normal as mud. You stop asking if you are well and start asking if you can still work. If the answer is yes, then you are fine, regardless of how much you bleed or cough. Bathing might help, but bathing is another danger. For one thing, water is cold, and in a land where warmth is survival, plunging yourself into icy streams is a gamble. For another, baths are rare luxuries. Soap exists, but it is harsh, lye-based, and smells less like flowers and more like betrayal. The first time you scrub with it, your skin burns, and you wonder if perhaps being filthy is safer. Most people bathe only a few times a year, if that, and when they do, the event is noteworthy enough to become gossip. Cleanliness is suspicious. To smell strongly of soap is to announce yourself as different, and different is dangerous. So you stay dirty, layered in smoke, sweat, and earth. You learn to live with the itch, the grime, the faint suspicion that your entire body is one rash waiting to happen. You tell yourself dirt is protective, that mud keeps sickness out. Whether or not that is true, it is comforting enough to repeat. And then, beyond raiders and illness, there are the ordinary dangers of life. Fires that spread too quickly through huts built of wood and thatch. Animals that kick, bite, or trample. Storms that rip roofs from homes. Floods that swallow fields. Winters that freeze solid if you make the mistake of sleeping too far from the fire. The world is a gauntlet of hazards, and you walk it barefoot, blindfolded, hoping you make it through another day. What surprises you, though, is not the presence of danger, but the way people live with it. You would think constant fear would break them, and sometimes it does, but more often it bends them into resilience. They joke about the possibility of raids, laugh at their own coughs, sing songs about saints and spirits who may or may not be listening. They gather around fires, swap gossip, tell stories, and pretend the darkness pressing at the edges of the village is not filled with teeth. Humor becomes a shield sharper than steel, because sometimes the only way to survive is to laugh at your own misfortune. You grow used to living this way. Dangers stop feeling like intrusions and start feeling like background noise. You shovel dung while keeping one ear out for rumors of ships. You sip twig tea while coughing into your sleeve, assuring yourself it is just the smoke. You rub a charm between your fingers before bed, whisper a prayer to a saint you barely know, and tell yourself tomorrow will be manageable. Survival is not about eliminating threats. Survival is about ignoring them long enough to keep moving. In the end, life here is not safe and never will be. But safety is not the goal. The goal is endurance. To live with fear without letting it paralyze you. To work through pain without letting it stop you. To laugh while knowing tomorrow could bring fire, fever, or famine. Danger is the constant companion of your life, but so is resilience. And somehow, against the odds, that balance keeps you standing. So you cough, you itch, you shovel, you pray. You glance nervously at the horizon. You mutter charms under your breath. You avoid the soap. You endure the healer's leeches. And you keep living. Because in Dark Age Britain, to live at all is already to defy the dangers waiting at your door. And that, grim as it is, feels like victory. If you were hoping that life might improve by climbing the ladder of Dark Age society, I have bad news. The ladder is short, crooked, and mostly covered in mud. The difference between peasant and noble is not a chasm, but a puddle. And like most puddles here, it is shallow, filthy, and never dries up. As a peasant, your life is straw, smoke, and porridge, flavored with regret. As a minor noble, your life is still straw, still smoke, and still porridge. But occasionally, the porridge has herbs in it. Nobility, in other words, is not so much a transformation as it is a slight upgrade. You may own 2 tunics instead of 1. You may have servants, though the word servant is misleading, since they are just other peasants forced to shovel dung on your behalf. You might dine on barley stew thickened with beans and, if fortune is really smiling, sprinkled with wild garlic or leeks. It smells better than plain gruel, though it still leaves you farting into eternity. Nobles live in bigger huts, sometimes even in halls with wooden beams instead of sagging thatch. Fires burn larger, benches replace the dirt floor, and walls might be hung with rough cloth to trap heat. But the truth remains. The rain still leaks, the smoke still stings your eyes, the fleas still bite, and the cold still seeps in through every crack. You smell just as bad as the peasants who serve you, and you know it. Soap is still rare, bathing is still suspicious, and everyone's teeth are equally terrible. Status cannot buy hygiene. And though nobles eat slightly better, they still fear famine. A failed harvest starves everyone equally, only at different speeds. A peasant feels it first, watching children cry as bowls empty. A noble feels it later, when his stew becomes thinner, when his servants begin to vanish from hunger, when he looks at his stores and realizes they will not last the winter. Hunger is democratic here. It makes no distinction between those who shovel dung and those who own the dung shovel. Nobility brings new anxieties too, like poisoning. Power attracts enemies, and enemies sometimes come with herbs less fragrant than garlic. A goblet of ale might hide a powder. A stew might carry a secret bitterness. Nobles eat suspiciously, eyes flicking toward the servant who ladled their meal, wondering if tonight is the night the stew does more than fill their stomach. Peasants rarely worry about poison. Poverty is its own slow venom. Nobles must live with both. Above both peasants and nobles, perched like owls on the rafters of society, sit the monks. They are the literate elite, the strange men cloistered in stone houses, scratching symbols onto parchment, while everyone else scratches lice from their hair. To peasants, monks are sorcerers of ink and Latin, conjuring words no one else can read. To nobles, monks are allies and chroniclers, preserving their names in books so future generations might remember that they once wore 2 tunics instead of 1. Monks are astronomers too, charting the stars with careful diagrams, counting days with lunar cycles, and doodling in the margins when boredom strikes. Open their manuscripts and you might find a solemn prayer alongside a sketch of a grumpy cat or a knight fighting a snail. These doodles survive through centuries, the closest thing to medieval memes, proof that even cloistered scholars needed to entertain themselves. But literacy is rare. More than 99% of the population cannot read or write. You do not sign your name because you do not have one in the written sense. You do not record your history because parchment is too precious to waste on ordinary lives. Your education, if you can call it that, is survival. You learn which roots can be eaten without vomiting, which herbs ease a fever, which tracks in the mud belong to a wolf and which belong to a dog. You learn how to mend a roof, dig a ditch, carry water, swing a hoe, and, above all, endure. Peasants measure knowledge in usefulness, not ink. No one cares if you can recite Latin, but everyone cares if you can build a fire in the rain. You do not know the constellations, but you know when the sky looks wrong, when storms are coming, when the soil is tired. You cannot write poetry, but you can tell a story that keeps the village laughing around a smoky fire. You cannot read the Bible, but you remember enough prayers and charms to hedge your bets with saints and spirits alike. The gap between noble and peasant is wide in perception but narrow in reality. Nobles command, peasants obey. Nobles tax, peasants pay. Nobles fight, peasants suffer. Yet both smell of smoke, both chew on gruel, both fear hunger, disease, and raids. One wears slightly finer wool, the other wears patches on patches. One sleeps on a raised bench, the other on damp straw. Neither sleeps well. If you are a peasant, nobles feel distant, abstract, like weather. Sometimes they bless you, sometimes they curse you. Always they loom above you, reminding you that the mud you slog through belongs to them. If you are a noble, peasants feel necessary, unavoidable, like livestock. They work your land, fill your storehouses, die in your fields, and you remind yourself that their misery sustains your slightly less miserable life. Both sides resent the other. Both depend on the other. And both are equally trapped in the endless churn of survival. And then there are the monks again, watching from their cloisters, ink-stained fingers preserving stories of kings and saints while ignoring the peasants who fed them and the nobles who patronized them. They will write of Christ, of miracles, of battles fought with divine favor. They will not write of the day you carried water until your shoulders bled, or the night you lay awake counting the coughs of your children. Your life does not survive on parchment. It survives only in memory, in stories told by firelight, in the laughter and sighs of those who endure alongside you. So when people centuries later ask what the difference was between noble and peasant, you would laugh if laughter were not such a waste of breath. The difference was a second tunic. The difference was a handful of herbs in the stew. The difference was fear of poison instead of fear of starvation. Everything else, the cold, the smoke, the mud, the stench, was the same. And perhaps that is the great truth of Dark Age Britain. Whether noble or peasant, monk or farmer, servant or lord, you all lived in the same damp, dangerous, dung-scented world. You all suffered. You all endured. You all died too young. The only difference was what you clutched in your hands along the way: a quill, a hoe, a ladle, or a sword. And none of them, in the end, made life much easier. The day is mud, smoke, and toil. But the evenings, those few fragile hours between work and sleep, are where the village remembers it is made of people, not just bodies shoveling dung. The sun drops, if you could even see it through the fog, and the world sinks into dimness. Inside the huts, fires sputter and glow, filling the rooms with the kind of smoky haze that could both warm your bones and choke your lungs. It is here, crouched around flames with neighbors, family, and livestock pressed too close, that leisure begins. Do not picture comfort. The benches are hard, the air thick, the fire unreliable. Sparks pop, embers spit, and the smoke curls into your eyes until tears run down your face. But the company is good, or at least necessary, and necessity is the mother of all medieval entertainment. You huddle close not only for warmth, but for the relief of voices. After a day spent grunting at animals and groaning under loads, words feel like a gift. Storytelling is the crown jewel of evening life. There are no books in your hut, no parchments tucked under your arm, no ink to record anything, but there are stories. And stories travel farther than parchment ever could. The old woman tells of giants who once walked the hills, of spirits who guard rivers, of kings who lived so long ago they might as well be myths. The children lean forward, wide-eyed, ignoring the fleas crawling over their ankles. You nod, pretending you have not heard the same tale 100 times, because each retelling is different, shaped by mood, memory, and the size of the audience. Gossip, however, is the true heartbeat of the village. If storytelling is history, gossip is news, and it spreads faster than fire through thatch. Who argued with whom in the field? Who lost a chicken? Who might be cursed because their cow stopped giving milk? This is your medieval social media. There is no parchment scroll declaring births and deaths, but the village knows anyway. The information system is immediate, merciless, and delightfully embellished. By the time the gossip has circled the fire, a simple quarrel becomes a blood feud, a missing goat becomes an omen, and a new tunic is evidence of witchcraft. You laugh, because if you didn't, the absurdity of your own life would crush you. Music drifts into the evenings too. Someone produces a crude pipe. Another strums a lyre or bangs rhythmically on a drum made from stretched hide. The sound is rough, uneven, but it is enough to carry you away for a moment. Children clap, women hum, men stamp their feet. Sometimes someone dares to sing, their voice rising through the smoke, thin but strong, weaving prayers, jokes, or laments into melody. You forget the taste of porridge for a while, the ache in your back, the stink of the hut. For a few minutes, the world feels less cruel. Dancing is clumsy but joyous. There is no elegance, no choreographed grace, just stamping, clapping, spinning until you trip over your own feet. You laugh, you wheeze, you nearly fall into the fire, and you keep going because joy is rare and must be wrung out of life whenever it offers itself. Children imitate their elders. Goats wander through the chaos. Someone bangs into the wall, and the entire hut shakes with noise. Riddles are popular too, a way to flex the mind in a world that rarely asks for thought beyond survival. What runs but has no legs? What grows but is never fed? The riddles are simple, sometimes absurd, but they spark debate. Neighbors argue, children guess wildly. The old mutter answers only they believe are correct. It is a contest of wits without winners, an excuse to speak, to laugh, to tease. Then there are games, improvised from whatever is at hand. Arm wrestling is common, but not always between humans. Chickens are sometimes involved, though the rules are unclear, and the chickens rarely cooperate. Wrestling a bird is less about strength and more about humiliation, as feathers fly, claws scratch, and the crowd howls with laughter. Shadow puppets flicker on the wall when someone holds their hands in front of the firelight. Dogs, birds, demons, and strange shapes appear. Exaggerated by the dancing flames, children squeal, adults chuckle, and everyone knows that for a moment, imagination is more powerful than hunger. Drinking, of course, is central to all of this. Ale brewed from barley or oats, weak and sour, fills crude mugs and warms bellies. It is not refined, not strong, but it is safer than water and dulls the edge of exhaustion. Sometimes it is flavored with herbs, sometimes not, but always it flows, loosening tongues, softening laughter, turning quarrels into jokes, and jokes into quarrels again. By the end of the night, half the stories told will be forgotten, but the warmth of the evening lingers. Even leisure is touched by the endless mud. If the firewood is damp, smoke thickens until you choke. If the ale runs low, tempers flare. If the goat refuses to leave the hut, your entertainment involves chasing it out with shouts and laughter. But these inconveniences are woven into the fabric of your evenings. They are part of the charm. If charm can exist in a world where fleas feast on your ankles while you clap along to a tune played on a pipe carved from bone. And so the evenings pass. Storytelling stretches long into the dark. Gossip grows wilder, music stumbles on, and laughter echoes against smoky walls. You know the work will come again with dawn. The mud will cling, the dangers will return. But for now, with ale in your hand and warmth on your face, you let yourself forget. You are not just a body in mud. You are part of a community, a voice in the dark, a laugh among many. It is not a luxury. It is not easy, but it is life, and sometimes, against all odds, it is joy. If life in Dark Age Britain could be summarized in one word, it would not be faith or war, or even mud, though mud is a close contender. No, the word is weather. Weather is the villain in every story, the enemy at every door, the relentless force that shapes your moods, your crops, your bones, your very sense of what is possible. You do not check forecasts, because forecasts do not exist. You check the sky, the soil, the ache in your joints, and what it tells you is usually the same. Expect misery. Rain is the most faithful companion of your days. It does not arrive in gentle showers or refreshing storms, but in endless drizzle that seeps into everything. Your clothes, already rough and itchy, become heavy with dampness. Your boots squelch until your feet prune like old fruit. The thatch of your hut sags and drips, and no amount of buckets can catch it all. Rain is not a passing visitor, it is a permanent resident. It breaks morale not with violence, but with persistence. A clear day is a miracle, so rare that people remark on it as though God himself descended to dry your laundry. When rain finally pauses, frost takes its turn. Winter mornings find your breath hanging in the air, your fingers stiff before you have even risen from the straw. You wrap yourself in every scrap of wool you own, but the cold still seeps through, curling around your bones until you shiver even beside the fire. The earth hardens, the streams freeze, and your body becomes a battlefield between endurance and numbness. Slush follows, that half-frozen slurry of mud and ice that soaks your feet and steals your balance. Walking becomes a hazard, every step a gamble. You fall, you curse, you rise again, covered in the same filth you tried to avoid. By the time you reach your field, you are already exhausted, and the day has barely begun. The seasons do not bring relief, only variety. Spring is mud, summer is sweat and insects, autumn is mud again, and winter is frost and hunger. Your entire existence is a weather report written on your skin. Chapped hands, cracked lips, damp clothes, aching joints. You do not fight the weather, you endure it, curse it, and then laugh bitterly at its persistence. If there is a god of rain, you assume he lives nearby and hates you personally. Against this backdrop of endless drizzle and biting wind, marriage emerges not as romance but as strategy. You do not marry for love, at least not primarily. You marry for goats, for land, for the hope that combining two fragile lives might produce enough children to keep a household functioning. Marriage is a practical alliance, a contract written not on parchment but in chores, births, and the quiet acceptance of shared misery. The negotiations are rarely poetic. A father speaks to another father. A mother whispers the details. Livestock is counted, land measured, hands shaken. The young couple's opinion is noted, perhaps, but not always honored. You find yourself betrothed because it makes sense, because your family's patch of land aligns with another, because your goats need to mingle with someone else's goats. You nod, you bow, you marry. The wedding itself is not grand. There are no towering cakes, no white dresses, no lavish feasts. There is ale, weak but plentiful, laughter, a blessing from the priest, and then a night of nervous fumbling in the dark, while the rest of the village whispers and giggles outside. Romance is awkward, short-lived, and not the point. The point is survival. Children are the true goal, the insurance policy against famine, disease, and raids. You have many, because many will not survive. Each birth is greeted with joy tempered by fear, each child swaddled in wool and watched closely, because fevers and coughs snatch lives quickly. If 3 survive to adulthood, you count yourself fortunate. If more survive, you call it a miracle. And yet, within this pragmatic arrangement, affection grows. It is not the sweeping romance of poets, but small gestures matter. A shared smile at the fire, a hand reaching out in the dark, a laugh exchanged over the absurdity of life. You endure together, and endurance in this world is love enough. You learn your partner's silences, their sighs, the way they shift when the hut leaks directly on their face, the way they mutter when the goat chews through the bedding again. You raise children together, bury children together, rebuild roofs together, survive winters together. Love is not grand but steady, and in steadiness lies strength. Children fill the hut, their cries and laughter echoing through smoky air. They fetch water, chase chickens, trip in mud, and cough through the nights. They are both joy and burden, hope and exhaustion. Each birth adds to your household's chances of survival, but each mouth also demands food. You feed them porridge, teach them chores, scold them when they slack, laugh when they tumble, and pray they live long enough to repeat the cycle. In moments of quiet, when rain drums endlessly on the roof and the fire burns low, you look around at your family and feel something like peace. Not joy, exactly, not contentment, but a recognition that in the face of mud, frost, and hunger, you are not alone. You are bound by weather, by necessity, by the endless churn of survival, and somehow, within that, by love. Marriage is not poetry, but it is partnership. The weather is not kind, but it is constant. Between the two, your life finds rhythm. Rain falls, children cry, goats bleat, partners sigh, and the world carries on. And though you will never write sonnets, never carve hearts into trees, never whisper vows in candlelit chapels, you live the truest vow of all, to endure together until the mud finally claims you. If life in Dark Age Britain feels like one long endurance test, then death is the inevitable judge waiting at the finish line. Everyone you know talks about it, not because they are morbid, but because it is everywhere. Death is in the coughs echoing through the hut at night, in the swollen belly of a sick child, in the smoke that chokes your lungs, in the rumors of raiders drifting down from the coast. It walks with you as constantly as mud sticks to your boots. The greatest miracle of your age is not a saint's vision or a king's decree. It is simply surviving long enough to complain about your knees. The ideal death, The one people whisper about with reverence is the quiet one. In bed, surrounded by family, slipping away gently after a long life. But long life is a fantasy. Few reach it. Most deaths come abruptly, with no chance for final words or goodbyes. A plague moves through your village like a storm, leaving empty straw beds in its wake. A wound from a farming tool festers, spreading fever until the body burns itself out. A raider's axe falls before you even realize you are in battle. There is no dignity in most endings here, only speed and inevitability. Children die most often. You grow up expecting it, though it does not make it easier. Birth is dangerous, infancy even more so. A simple cough can turn fatal in days. A fever can steal a child before a parent knows what to do. Families have many children not because they want bustling households, but because they know half of them will not live to see adulthood. Each death is grieved, but each survival is cherished twice as much. You learn to love fiercely and briefly, because nothing is guaranteed. Plague is a specter that hangs over every generation. No one understands it fully. You do not speak of germs or contagion, but you see how illness spreads, leaping from hut to hut like sparks in dry grass. Sometimes it is smallpox, sometimes fevers, sometimes something nameless that leaves bodies cold before you even give it a name. The air thickens with fear. People whisper charms. Priests double their prayers. Healers smear more mud and burn more herbs. None of it stops the tally of the dead. Whole villages vanish, their huts collapsing into silence. Survival feels less like resilience and more like luck. Accidents claim almost as many lives as illness. A slip on a wet roof, a tumble into a well, a kick from a horse, a spark from the fire, each one can end a life in seconds. There is no safety net, no bandage strong enough, no doctor to mend what is broken. A broken bone can mean infection. Infection can mean fever. Fever can mean death. One moment you are working, the next you are gone. Life is fragile, not a flame but a thin thread, and it frays constantly. Raids add another layer of danger. When Vikings appear or any armed band, really death comes with fire and screaming. You cannot fight them, only flee, praying the woods will hide you. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. When you return, huts are burned, bodies scattered. Everything you knew is reduced to ash. Raids remind you that survival is never fully in your hands. It can be stolen from you in a heartbeat by men you never met, who do not care about your stories, your children, or your prayers. Even for those who escape plague, accident, and raiders, death comes young. Reaching 30 is considered an accomplishment. Reaching 40 is remarkable. Few see 50. Elders are revered not just for their wisdom, but for the fact that they are still breathing. You look at a gray-haired villager the way future generations will look at astronauts, with awe, with disbelief, with a quiet wish to follow in their footsteps. Dignity in death is rare. There are no funerals with polished coffins or carved stones. The body is wrapped in cloth or placed directly in the earth, covered quickly before animals or weather interfere. Prayers are spoken, charms tied, tears shed, and then life moves on, because it must. The fields do not wait for mourning. The goats do not stop bleeding for grief. Survival requires you to work even while you bury. Yet death, harsh as it is, shapes the way you live. Knowing it is close makes every day a negotiation. You value the smallest victories. Waking up without fever, finding enough food for a meal, surviving a winter without losing too many children. Laughter around the fire becomes sharper, more urgent, because you know it must be savored now, before it is taken away. Love, though practical, feels sacred when it endures another year. Every breath is defiance. Sometimes, when you lie in your straw bed, smoke curling above you and the sound of coughing filling the hut, you wonder why you fight so hard to live. The answer is simple: because living is victory. In a world where death lurks at every corner, survival is rebellion. Each day you rise, each chore you complete, each story you tell is proof that the mud, the plague, the raids, the accidents, the endless weight of misery, none of it has beaten you yet. And perhaps that is the legacy of Dark Age Britain. Not its kings or its wars or its monks writing Latin in cold halls. The true legacy is ordinary people, enduring, surviving, laughing in the face of endless death. You will not be remembered by name, but your persistence echoes in the lives that follow. Every survival, no matter how small, matters. So when the time comes, whether in bed, in fever, in fire, or in the mud, you hope it is quick. You hope it is not too cruel. You hope your children remember you, if they live. But until that day, you keep going. You cough, you work, you laugh, you endure. Because here, in Dark Age Britain, life itself is the rarest treasure. And survival, however brief, is triumph enough. In the end, the story of Dark Age Britain is not the tale of kings and battles, though monks with their pens would like you to think so. It is not the story of shining swords, of glorious raids, of saints and miracles carved into stone. No, the truer story lies in huts that leaked, in porridge that tasted of moss, in families huddled together against smoke and frost. It lies in the endless mud that swallows boots and spirits alike. It lies in the ordinary people who woke each day not to conquer, but to endure. Life here was hunger, constant and gnawing, shaping every decision you made. It was superstition layered over prayer, faith stitched together from saints and spirits, charms and chants, all whispered in hope that one of them might be listening. It was fear of Vikings on the horizon, of illness in the chest, of fire in the thatch, of hunger in the belly. It was filth clinging to skin and clothes, a stench that became identity, a grime that never left. It was brief lives, punctuated by too many graves dug too shallow in muddy fields. And yet it was not only suffering, there was laughter, even if it came through coughing. There was gossip shared around smoky fires, music scratched from pipes, riddles muttered by children whose toes curled in the dirt. There were dances clumsy but joyous. Chickens rustled for fun, stories told and retold until they blurred into legend. There was resilience woven into the very fabric of survival. You laughed not because life was easy, but because life demanded it. Community was the fortress when no stone walls stood. Neighbors carried rumors as eagerly as they carried buckets. Families worked together, survived together, mourned together. The evenings, crowded into huts where the smoke stung and the goats intruded, were proof that even in mud and misery, people find ways to be human. Stories, songs, and shared silence were a kind of rebellion against despair. Survival itself was victory. To wake, to eat gruel, to shovel dung, to cough and laugh and carry water to make it through the day was to win a battle no one would ever write down. Every life here was a quiet defiance of the odds. No monuments mark the names of the peasants who endured. No chronicles list their chores and fears. But their endurance is the reason history continued at all. There were no heroes here, not really. No legends. Just people in mud huts, bracing against weather, praying to anything that might listen, raising children who might or might not live to raise children of their own. They were not glorious. They were not celebrated, but they survived. And in that survival, they carved out the fragile thread of continuity that became the future. So when you think of the Dark Ages, do not picture only kings with crowns or monks with quills. Picture the woman scrubbing rushes from her hut floor. Picture the man dragging a sled of dung through the mud. Picture the child gnawing on a root, laughing at a riddle, coughing in the smoke. Picture the evenings around the fire, when gossip and shadow puppets turned misery into something almost like joy. This was life. Endless mud, endless hunger, endless fear, and yet endless endurance. And that endurance was not loud. It did not shout. It did not write itself in ink or carve itself in stone. It lived quietly, in laughter, in gossip, in the stubborn persistence of people who refused to stop breathing. In a world of short lives and hard deaths, to simply endure was rebellion. To find humor was victory. To gather around a smoky fire and tell stories was legacy. And in that way, the ordinary became extraordinary, not because they sought greatness, but because they survived when everything conspired against them. The Dark Ages were not truly dark. They were dim, smoky, and damp, but in that dimness, there flickered light, not the light of kings, not the light of glory, but the fragile, flickering glow of ordinary people enduring. And that, perhaps, is the truest legend of all.